to Rachel Feldman, works in our Char office and handles the back end here. Thank you, Rachel. So we are going to watch, it's a difficult part of this musical to watch. And there's so many difficult parts. And by the end of it, I was actually explaining to my 12-year-old daughter who was just being introduced to Les Mis, and I was going to watch the movie with her. And I said, basically, everybody dies in the end of this. Everybody dies. We were watching one of the student scenes. I said, he's going to die. He's going to die. They're all going to die. Basically, everyone except Jean Valjean and Marius and Cosette will die by the end of this. So it's not an easy story. And this character of Fantine is a tragic character. She dies way at the beginning of the musical. And in many ways, her death is the catalyst for so much of what happens in the rest of the life of Jean Valjean and his family. So we're not going to watch Fantine's death today. We're not going to watch Fantine's death. It sounds so too blithe. We're watching Fantine's arrest. So she's already been kicked out of the factory where she had been working. She has no money. She has no income. She's forced to sell herself on the streets. And we know that she sells her hair. She sells, in the movie, I don't remember if the staged production also has her selling her teeth. And then she joins the prostitutes. And I have to just say, I really wanted to use the song I Dreamed a Dream. In the end, I chose not to, but we'll listen to I Dreamed a Dream at the end of our hour. We'll listen to I Dreamed a Dream because we can't not listen. But I chose instead to focus on the scene of Fantine's arrest because it's so significant in this journey that Jean Valjean is on. He, in many ways, allowed Fantine to get into this situation that she's in. It's because of him that he turned away, and his foreman of the factory fired her. And so indirectly, he allowed for her to be on the streets instead of really dealing with whatever the bickering that was happening in the factory and who really was to blame. It wasn't Fantine's fault. And so she's on the streets and she becomes, she lost her dignity. She lost her selfhood, and she eventually becomes very ill and dies because of it. And in this scene, Fantine is actually threatened by a nobleman and mistreated. She ends up hitting him, and none other than Javert is there. Inspector Javert arrests her or tries to arrest her. So what we're going to see is the scene where Fantine is clearly innocent. She's being blamed for basically fighting back against this abuser. And Javert in the moment is trying to arrest her, and Jean Valjean steps in and saves her and says she needs a hospital. She needs a hospital, not a prison, and takes her to a hospital where she will die. What we're looking at here is the way that Fantine has had to turn to this life in order to get what she needs, and the way that Jean Valjean ultimately steps up and takes responsibility. And the biblical story we're comparing it to is also a difficult story. It's the story of Judah and Tamar. Some of the parallels are fairly obvious, where Tamar becomes a prostitute, or actually just dresses up as a prostitute in order to set things right. And Judah doesn't know it's her and ends up hiring this prostitute. And we'll look at the story in detail, but ultimately it ends with Judah saying she is right. Tzadka mimeni, she is correct. It's a very complicated family drama, but she was trying to force him to take responsibility for what he did, and we'll see that story. I'm a little bit hesitant to try and attack that whole story in a short amount of time, so we'll see. When we get to the text, we'll see how thoroughly we can manage it. But for now, just think about these themes of responsibility and vulnerability and what it takes for a woman to get what she needs, which sadly in those days, a woman did not have power and did not have, independent financial means or any way of protecting herself. So we begin now with Fantine's arrest. We're going to watch the version of it from the 2012 film, simply because it's so vivid. And I don't know if this is a trigger warning or what. It's a hard scene to watch, but it's beautiful. It's beautiful to see the way Jean Valjean steps in and physically carries her away to safety.
You've got some nerve, you little slut. You've got some gall. By Christ, you'll pay for what you've done. I guarantee I'll make you suffer.
I beg you, don't record, mister. I'll do whatever you may want.
Excuse me.
Tell me quickly what's the story? Who saw what and why and where? Let him give a full description. Let him answer to Javert.
Javert, would you believe it? I was lost here in the dark when this prostitute attacked me. You can see she left her mark.
She will answer for her actions if you make a full report. You may rest assured, monsieur, she will answer to the court.
There's a child who sorely needs me. Please, monsieur, she's got that heart. Holy God, is there no mercy? If I go to jail, she'll die.
I have heard such protestations every day for 20 years. Let's have no more explanations. Save your breath, save your tears. Honest work, just reward. That's the way to please the Lord.
A moment of your time, Javert. I do believe this woman's tale.
Monsieur le Maire.
You've done your duty. Let her be. She needs a doctor, not a jail.
Monsieur le Maire.
Speak.
Where will she end? This child without a friend. I've seen your face before. Show me some way to help you. How have you come to grief in such a place as this?
Monsieur, don't mock me now, I pray. It's hard enough I've lost my pride. You let your foreman send me away. Yes, you were there and turned aside. I never did no wrong.
Is it true what I've done?
My daughter's close to dying.
To an innocent soul.
If there's a God above,
Had I only known then.
He'd let me die instead.
In his name, my task has just begun. I will take her to the hospital.
Monsieur le Maire.
Where is your child?
With an innkeeper at Montfermeil.
I will send for her immediately. I will see it done. Rest.
Just to clarify, she's talking about her child. And for those who aren't as familiar with the musical, she's talking about the child that she had, whose father left, and she sent her to live with an innkeeper, and she sends money to support the child. And of course, the letters from the innkeeper are dishonest. They're saying your child is sick, she needs more medicine, send us more money. So she has grown this story in her mind to the point that she says, my child is close to dying, which of course is not true. But all she can do is earn more money and send it to Cosette, to this innkeeper for Cosette. And that's why she's basically sold herself for the benefit of her child. I just want to point out also the character of Javert is constantly reassuring everyone around him and reassuring himself. Honest work, just reward. That's the way you'll please the Lord. Everything for him is black and white. Everything is, honesty will lead to justice. And if you've done something wrong, you'll pay for it. And so anyone who is a criminal, of course, it's because they deserved it. And that justice is ironically in contrast to the injustice that Fantine has faced. And she's completely innocent, and yet she's paying, and she's about to pay with her life. Then you also see Jean Valjean sort of saying, "This is my task now. I will see it done." So the rest of his life is about protecting this child, Cosette, taking her in as his own, which we'll see in the future scenes. So let's turn to our text. I saw a very interesting question in the chat. What do I plan first, the movie, the musical piece of this, or the text? And that's a great question. I'd say it goes in both directions. In this case, I thought about using I Dreamed a Dream. I couldn't find the right text. And instead it was this song where the text just jumped out at me. So I don't know. It goes both ways. It depends. So here we are. I'm about to just put this link in the chat. So if anyone wants to see it directly, they can see it on their own screen, this source sheet of our text from Sefaria. Here we go. And now I will share it on my screen. So the story of Fantine and Valjean. Oh, I just caught a typo. I wrote Tamara instead of Tamar and Judah. So I will correct that later. So this is happening right after the brothers have sold Joseph into slavery. We get a bit of an aside. So we leave that scene, and the text says, Vayehi ba'et hahi, around that time. Interestingly, the commentators notice that the timing may be a little off. It's possible or probable that this event actually occurred before they sold their brother. However, whichever way the chronology really happened, the Torah is connecting these two tales. So we'll talk about that a little bit. What might be the connection between Judah's role in selling of his brother Joseph, and now Judah's role here with regards to his daughter-in-law Tamar. So this is just kind of zoom in on Yehuda, on Judah's life. And Vayered Yehuda me'et echav. It says Judah left, but the verb is actually Vayered, he went down, he descended. One of the textual connections is that just before this, it said, and Joseph, V'Yosef hurad Mitzrayma, Joseph was descended down to Egypt. And then the same verb, and Judah descended, but he descended, morally, whereas Joseph descended just physically. He went down to Egypt. So Vayered Yehuda me'et echav, so he goes to this place, certain Dulamite. Okay, he essentially marries and has children. And we're going to skip through this beginning again. I just want to make sure we get through this text and make sure everyone understands it, because it gets a little complicated. But they have children. They have Er, they have Onan, and they have Shelah. 3 sons. And in verse 6, Vaikach Yuda Isha le'er. So Er, Bechoro, the firstborn, marries a woman named Tamar. And tragically, Er dies. We're not told why he dies. Vayehi Er Bechor Yehuda Ra be'enei Hashem. There's an implication, just like Javer's implication, that if you died, it was because it was something that you did. There's this justice. There's this implication in the text of the Torah as well. But that God took Er's life. So Judah has now lost a son, and Tamar has lost a husband. And in biblical law, we know of the levirate marriage, yibum, which is if the husband dies and they haven't had any children, it's the mitzvah of the brother to marry this widow. Vayomer Yehuda, and so Yehuda does the right thing. This is understood to be to benefit the woman and also to benefit the family, and we've talked about this with the story of Ruth, continuing the name of the deceased in some way. So Yehuda says to Onan, his second son, you go get married to Tamar, which is the right thing to do. Boel eshet achicha v'yabem. There's the word yibum, the levirate marriage. You should marry her. Do your duty to her as a brother-in-law. That's a very, very long translation of v'yabemota. But that's really what it is, the brother-in-law's duty. Vehakem zera le'achicha. You're providing offspring to your brother. So Onan is selfish. Onan realizes that whatever child will come from his union with Tamar won't be really his, will be sort of a name of his dead brother. So when Onan, vayeda Onan kilo lo yihi hazara, it's kind of like having your brother's child somehow. V'haya imba el eshet achiv v'shichet arza levilti netan zera le'achiv. So he spilled his seed so as not to impregnate Tamar. This is what colloquially is known as onanism. There's a whole other class here to give, which I'm definitely not giving. But Onan is sort of committing a selfish act, not wanting to have a child. And oh, thank you for there's a question in the chat about Yibum. Is it even if the brother is married that he should marry the sister-in-law? And the answer is, biblically speaking, when people did have multiple wives, and yes, certainly they would. In modern times, and not even such modern times, after polygamy is outlawed in Jewish law, which is around the year 1000, we obviously don't do yibum, but instead we do chalitza, which is that shoe ritual. So the brother-in-law doesn't have to marry the widow. The brother-in-law can absolve himself of this duty to his dead brother by doing the chalitza ritual, which had to do with a shoe and a spit and the beit din. And it's a little bit of a disgrace to him. I mean, not if he's married already, but if he doesn't want to uphold his brother's name in this way, the same way Onan is sort of disgraced here, but he has that option to do chalitza. His father married him off, and so this was the only, I guess, recourse he had. But whatever it is, what he did was bad. Vaye Rabba ene Hashem, the same language. It was bad in God's eyes. Asher asa, that which he did. Vayamet gamoto. Now God has killed 2 children of Judah. Very tragic. So here's the scenario. This is really where the story begins in many ways. So that's the backdrop. 2 sons have died. Judah says to his daughter-in-law Tamar, don't marry my 3rd son. The way he does it is sort of by avoiding the issue. Vayomer Yehuda leTamar kalato, shvi almana beit avich. Go back to your father's house and stay a widow, meaning don't remarry, until ad yigdal Shelah beni, until my 3rd son Shelah grows up. But really inside he's thinking, ki amar, he's saying to himself, pen yamut gam hu ke'echav, my goodness, he's going to die too. This woman is bad luck. Already she was married to 2 sons that died. I'm not going to give her to the 3rd. So I'm just going to tell her, like, just delay her, basically, make her sit as a widow for years and years, for her whole life, perhaps. And not really resolve this. It makes me think of the aguna problem. This is not aguna, but it's very similar, where a woman is divorced, but the man won't grant the religious divorce, the get, and basically is a jerk and keeps her tied to this dead marriage all her life. Another other class. So Tamar doesn't really have a choice. She is tied legally to Shelah unless there is a marriage or unless there is some other, official move, maybe the chalitza. But he hasn't done that, Judah. He's strung her along. So she goes back, Vatelech Tamar Vateshev Beit Aviha, and she's stuck now again back in her father's house, living in her father's house. And clearly much time has passed, plenty of time for Shelah to grow up, which was the reason that Judah gave. So verse Yes, verse 12. Vayirbu hayamim, vatamat bat Shua eshet Yehuda. So Judah loses his wife, vayinachem Yehuda, and he has time to be comforted. I see this as sort of a way of illustrating the passage of time, really lengthy passage of time, and also articulating that Yehuda probably is lonely because he's about to go see a prostitute. Vayinachem Yehuda. So he's sort of starting to move on. Vayalal goes a zayt, so no. He goes to the sheep shearing ceremony, perhaps, in Timna. So with his friend Chira, the Adulamite, this friend of his, which will play out in the story a little bit, and he's going to this place, and Tamar hears that this is where she is, right? That your father-in-law is coming this way. He's coming for the sheep sharing. So she decides to take matters into her own hands. And again, like Fantine, she, I guess, has no choice. It's not as extreme. It's not as terrible as what Fantine has faced, clearly. But she puts herself in a compromised position. Verse 14, Vatasar bigdei almenuta me'aleha. She takes off her widow's garb. So all this time, she has marked herself as a widow in some cultural way. And instead, she dresses in normal clothes. Vatechas batsaif. She covers her face with a veil, so that's how he won't recognize her. Vatit alaf, wrapping herself. Vatesha befetach einayim asher al derech timnata, and sits down at the entrance to einayim. That's a word that some of the commentators say it's symbolic. It means eyes, but okay, we're not going to go there. But she sits there in a very public place, I guess, where, at the city gate, or in the movie, it's at the port, right, where men are coming and going, and that's where the as the musical calls them, the lovely ladies, right? These ladies sit. But she sits there because she realizes that an injustice has been done. Ki ra'ata ki gadal shela v'hi lo nitna lo leisha. Shela clearly has grown. She has not been given the right to marry him. She has no prospects. She has no future. She cannot marry somebody else. So, and yes, there's a comment in the chat to me about maybe Tamar does stay committed to carrying on the family name. But even without that, she's known as the widow, and she's known as designated for Shela. It's like that bond is a halachic or a legal. I don't know if I could even use the word halacha in this early era, in this biblical era, but she's designated for him, unless they let her off the hook, or unless they have her marry him. So verse 15, Vayir'eha Yehuda, vayachsheveha lezona, ki chista paneha. Judah sees her. Judah takes her for a common harlot. She's disguised in some way. And he propositions her. He turns to her, Vayet eleha el haderech, vayomer havana avo elayich, ki lo yada ki chalatohi. So hiring a prostitute would not be against biblical law. A single woman, not be against biblical law. But the relationship to the daughter-in-law is one of the arayot, is a forbidden relationship. He didn't know that she was his daughter-in-law. So she says, okay, what are you going to pay me? What's the price? Verse 17, I'm going to send you a goat from my flock. Obviously, I can't pay it now. I have to wait till I get back to my flock. So she says, okay, leave me a collateral. Leave me some way that I'll know that I'm getting paid. Leave me a pledge until you pay me. Okay, so he says, fine, what should I leave? Ma ha'eravon asher etein lach. Vatomer, she says, leave me the following items. These are personal items, identifying items. Chotamcha ufetilcha umatcha. Your seal, your cord, or maybe it's your belt, and your staff, asher biyadecha, that you're holding. So he gives the items, he sleeps with her, and she becomes pregnant. Then the episode is over. She gets up, she leaves. It's kind of like this very unceremonious departure. It's a terrible scene. And she goes back to being who she is. And then sure enough, verse 20, Judah keeps his promise. He sends the payment through his friend. He's a little bit, I guess, trying to preserve his dignity, or maybe not, maybe his identity in some way. Vayishlach leYehuda et gedi ha'ezim beyad re'ehu ha'adulami lakachat ha'eravon miyad ha'isha. He wants to get back all those items that he left with the woman, so sends the payment, but velo mitza'at, she cannot be found. Vayish'al et anshe mikoma. So he's asking around, where is this prostitute? Aye kedesha. Kedesha is a word euphemism for prostitute. It has the word kadosh, holy. This is an unholy woman. Kedesha, this prostitute. Where is this woman that was by this place on this road? And they said, we don't know such a woman. She's nowhere to be found. Obviously, she doesn't exist. Verse 22. So he goes back, Vayashav el Yehuda, Vayomer lo mitzatiha, I can't find her. V'gam anshe hamakom amru lo hayta bazeh kedesha. And the local people say, there is no such person. Judah says, okay, I guess just let her keep these items, because if we make a big deal about this, we're going to be targeted. We're going to be, here the translation is a laughing stock, but we're going to be really a disgrace. Vayomer Yehuda tikachla, let her keep it, pen nihiyeh lavuz, that we not be disgraced with this whole story. Hine shalachti hagadi hazeh ve'ata lo mitzata. I did what I had to do. I sent the goat like I promised. You couldn't find her. We did our best. That's the end, or so he thinks. Vayehi kimishlosh chadashim. Approximately 3 months later, which is when people would start to notice that Tamar is pregnant. Vayugad leYehuda lemor. It is told to Judah this gossip about his daughter-in-law. Zanta Tamar kalatecha. Your daughter-in-law has become a prostitute. Look, she is pregnant. V'gam hinei hara liznunim. She is pregnant through prostitution, through harlotry, which is against the law because she is quasi-married. She is promised to another man, to Shelah. Vayomer Yehuda hotzi'uha v'tisarev. Basically, punish her, burn her. Justice must be served. And the deep irony of that, I mean, he flies off the handle with anger, but also he's saying something that would have been in those days in theory, an appropriate punishment. And by the way, the Sanhedrin sort of legalizes away all of this capital punishment, but it is stated in the Torah itself. I'm just noticing this comment about loyalty and value for one relationship, right? And there would have been so much death. So maybe not so devastating, but certainly it's this relationship that's at play where Tamar's life is on the line. She's being held in sort of in the balance. She can't marry him because Judah hasn't given her to him, and she can't marry someone else because she's bound to him. So she does this. Yehuda says, burn her. And then verse 25, he mutzeit v'hi shalcha el chamiha lemor. As she is, this is like very dramatic, she is being brought out, like they're taking her out of her house. Maybe even go burn her at the stake. I don't know what it doesn't say explicitly, but that's the implication. She says in a message to Judah, Le'ish asher ela lo anochi hara. This man, the man to whom these items belong, that's who impregnated me. Vatomer hakerna lemi hachotemet v'haptilim v'hamata ela. So recognize whose seal and cord and staff are these. And of course, that's her way of saying it was you, Judah. Vayaker Yehuda. Judah recognizes the items. Vayomer, and this is Judah's greatness. So maybe in this moment, Judah is being accused of a terrible wrongdoing. And just as Jean Valjean has that moment of like, can it be so? Have I done that? Was it my responsibility? Is that why you're here in this scenario? Your life is at stake. Her life is at stake, Tamar, in a very direct way. And he says, just as Jean Valjean says, Sadka mimeni, she is right. Sadka, the word sadka is tzedek, is justice. She is more just than I. I thought here I was doing the just thing, punishing her for a terrible crime or whatever, but really she did no crime. It was I who did this crime. Because I didn't give her to my son Sheila. And I'm not sure why. I didn't have time actually to look into this. Why does the text need to say, and by the way, he was not intimate with her again. Perhaps the implication is that he didn't pursue her as a wife, which could have been his right. He let her be, and also didn't pursue the matter further. And sure enough, they leave her alone. She is going to have her child, or in this case, it's children. She has twins, and there's a recognition that this is a positive thing. This is part of the progeny of Judah. Verse 27. I'm trying to get the English and the Hebrew on the screen at the same time, which is tricky here sometimes. When she is giving birth, and she will have twins, vehine, behold, because they didn't have any ultrasounds, although maybe before then they probably had figured it out, sometime before birth. So then there's this sort of twin story, very much like Esav and Yaakov. One twin tries to push his way out first, the other twin gets out instead. So the first twin sticks out his hand. Can you imagine what giving birth to twins would have been like in the ancient world? So they tie a rope, a little string around the first hand, because they say, this one is the Bechor, Ze Yatsa Rishona, this one was the firstborn. And then verse 29, Vayihi Kimei Shiv Yado, they get the hand back in, Vehine Yatsa Achiv, and the brother comes out first. Vatomer Ma Paratzta Alecha Peretz, you burst through. Vayikra Shemo Paretz. Peretz, you've breached through, and they called him Peretz for that word. Ve'achar yatsa achiv asher al yado hashani. And then the brother, who really was kind of the firstborn, came out second. Vayikra Shemo Zarach. Zarach is more like sunrise, like a rise. And I just have to make this connection with the name Peretz. Peretz, who is kind of breaches his way through. It's a breach of boundaries, and Peretz is a same word that's used for any kind of breach of moral boundaries, breach of cultural boundaries. In the modern Hebrew, pritzut is licentiousness, is that kind of sexual inappropriateness, which she did. She had to breach the social mores and the moral expectations in order to do what she felt was right, was her only choice. And to Judah's credit, he recognizes that she didn't have a choice. He recognizes he was in the wrong. And he recognizes that his mistake was in kind of cutting off his family, because if his son Shelah will not have a child, then there will be no progeny, there will be no future for this branch of the sons of Jacob. So in a way, he is killing his line if he doesn't allow Tamar and Shelah to have children, to continue. We can understand him. I mean, he doesn't want to lose another child. It's tragic, but he does the wrong thing. And it's Tamar who is able to teach him a lesson. So before we turn away from this story, I want to mention, as I started, that there are many ways we can understand Judah's character as having developed now from the Judah that we saw with his brothers selling Joseph, and the Judah that we see now becoming the Judah of the future, which is a Judah who takes responsibility, who says, I did something wrong. I need to pay the price. And before we turn to, I have just one more very small text to share with you. I'm just looking at the chat for a moment. Yes, it is feasible. Absolutely. It is feasible that they had girls, and that might not have been mentioned. The best, by the way, the best example of where sons are born and daughters are not mentioned, but daughters must have been born, was with the very first biblical family, Cain and Abel. We know we have Cain, we know we have Abel, and we know Cain, Hevel, and Seth. There's a third son eventually as well. And then they have children. How do they have children if there are only men born? So of course the Midrash fills this in. Cain was born with a twin sister. Hevel was born with a twin sister. This is who they're marrying, in this primordial time, at least according to the Midrash. So yeah, it's very possible daughters are being born and not named. But sons are seen to be, the continuers of the legacy and of the name of the family and of the tribe, which goes by the sons. And at least in the children of Jacob, they do mention Dinah. So we assume that in that generation, there are 12 sons and only one daughter. But that may not be the case for the children of Judah. It may not be the case. We'd have to go back and read the genealogies, because it lists and lists and lists, many names. I don't have it off the tip of my tongue here. But thank you for that comment. So Yehuda, let's just rewind for a second. Yehuda, Judah, and his brothers really can't stand Yosef. He's a tormentor. They want to get rid of him. They say, let's kill him. No, let's not kill him. Let's sell him into slavery. And it was Judah who said, let's sell him into slavery. And it really is Judah there who takes the lead. And selling him into slavery isn't directly killing him, but it's kind of ending his life. He will be in servitude. He eventually is imprisoned. And, he doesn't really take responsibility for what he does. He lies they all lie to their father, but he takes the lead on that. And the Torah text sort of sees this as now Judah needs to do some moral development here. And I'm just showing you an excerpt from the Talmud, from the Tractate of Sota, where there's a recognition of the centrality of garments. Tamar wraps herself in garments. There's Joseph, who has his colored coat, his garment, his special garment. And more so, it's Judah who leaves it's not garments, but it's personal items, right? His staff, his seal. And that is what the Talmud here picks up on, the language of hakerna. I feel like I mentioned this recently in a class. Discern, please. Discern, please. Hakerna is the same language. Not only that Tamar says to Yehuda, look at this stuff. This is yours. That's how we can identify you. But it's also the language that Judah had said to his dad, look at this coat covered in blood. And that was how he identified Joseph. So the way that your clothing is part of your identity very much ties into these two stories being connected. And the language of hakerna, I'll just read it through. The verse says, hakerna, discern please, Tamar says. Discern please, whose are these? The signet, the cord, and the staff. And Rabbi Chama, son of Rabbi Chanina, says, Amar Rabbi Chama be Rabbi Chanina, behaker bister, with the word haker, discern, Judah informed his father, biser le'aviv, and behaker, with the same word, bisruhu, they informed Judah about what he had done. And it explains, so the same word, haker, discern, he informed Jacob, his father, when he brought him the coat of Joseph. He said to his father, hakerna haketonet bincha imlo. Look, they sent the coat of many colors. They brought it to their father. They said, this is what we found. Discern whether this is your son's coat. Like, this is Joseph's coat. And now it's that word that's coming back to bite him, where he has to acknowledge his his crime. And of course, the end of the story of Joseph and the brothers is where Judah's the one who steps up. Judah's the one who takes responsibility for Benjamin's well-being. Judah's the one who says, I care about my brother. I care about Benjamin. I will not let the sons of Rachel, go to their death. And then he stands up to Joseph and defends all of the brothers. And it's Judah who becomes the leader, becomes the ancestor of kings of Israel and so on. Peretz, by the way, that child that comes from Judah and Tamar, Peretz will lead all the way to King David, to leadership. So there's a kind of a righteousness in the way this story ends. And just to see there's a question in the chat about whether Tamar would have known about that story. It's a good question. Would Tamar have known? So at least according to the opinion that says this is written out of chronological order, that is the perspective that asserts that even though the story of Judah and Tamar is written after the story of Joseph, it happened chronologically earlier, which is not uncommon in the Torah. Sometimes different things are shuffled around, that it's written maybe thematically sometimes, but not necessarily chronologically. So I don't know if Tamar and Judah, if Tamar would have known what they did to their brother, or if it even had happened yet. I'm going to leave that question open. More likely than not, it's the Ibn Ezra, the commentator, who says that more likely than not, it hadn't happened yet. It hadn't happened yet. So I feel like I just ran a Talmudic race, trying to get through really a very complex family story. But I want to bring us back to these themes, and then I'll open up with Evelyn. I see you have your hand, and then anyone else who wants to say something. So again, we're looking at Judah in the same way that we're looking at Jean Valjean. And it's this woman who makes him see his guilt, who helps him understand that he did not act justly, that he has done the wrong thing. And unfortunately, the only power she has is her body, and is to sell her sexuality, or to use her sexuality to give this message. And so that other theme of her vulnerability in this story very much mirrors, Fantine's vulnerability. So there's morality, there's justice, there's gender, there's history, and there's Judah in the midst of all of this, who comes out okay in the end. Comments, questions? Evelyn, get us started, please.
So you you explained it a little bit now, but I was trying to figure out what was Tamar's original intent. What did she think? In what way did she feel she would benefit by sleeping with him and not knowing she'd become pregnant, but she did, because in the end, he didn't benefit from anything. She wasn't, he didn't marry her. She's left in as sad and miserable a condition as before she started the...
An important point. Is she better off? I think she's trying to prove her point. She's trying to prove his wrong. She's trying to prove that he should have taken care of her future. Maybe one of her goals is to be able to bear children. You're preventing me from having children by leaving me a widow in my father's house. So you know what? Then I'm going to take matters into my own hands. You don't want to give me to your son, Judah? I'm going to take you instead. It's actually incredibly powerful what she does. She says, I'm going to call the shots now. And she's not criticized. She's the righteous one. And she has to teach him what it really means to be righteous. Does that answer? I don't know if she's happy in the end. We don't get that part of the story.
Yeah, it's
but she's not. She's a bit of a tragic figure, but I believe she has the last laugh, and her children are revered. And Peretz is, leads to Boaz, leads to King David. Like Peretz is a hero. Tamar is a heroine here. Like, I don't know about her life. I don't know if she then raises her children in her father's house,
That's what I was just going to ask you.
Yeah, I mean, and this is, by the way, like this is the stuff of Midrash, or maybe modern Midrash. Could we imagine a Midrash of Tamar's, later years? That would be fascinating.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Evelyn. I see Esther had something to say.
Yes, I
Anyone
do.
else, feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself one at a time. Go ahead.
I see one very positive thing from the union of Tamar and Judah. And that is that they were not genetically connected. So if they had descendants, because so many of our background is, and I mean, even if you think about it, right from Adam and Eve, and to have this happen, even though it didn't happen and it shouldn't have happened, and with all the negative about it, I agree with you. I think she had power in the end and the last laugh, and a little bit of a life, because she would have been a lonely little person. I mean, she wasn't allowed to marry anybody else. And now she's got 2 children to take care of, which is,
Right. It's a blessing.
I call that positive.
Yeah.
And those children lead to, like you say, further generations who are not, up to that point anyways, genetically connected, which makes me feel good.
So for you, this is a happy ending in some way.
In a way.
Not the happiest, but a
I mean, we
decent.
could have had a wedding and a break, the whole thing, but it didn't happen. So you have to go with
Right.
the best from the flow.
Great. Thank you, Esther. Anybody else? Oh, such a quiet, demure group. David, I knew you'd save us.
Well, I get the impression that Judah's family was like aristocracy at the time. And I think Tamar probably wanted to marry into that family.
Oh, maybe. Yeah, because he's the son of Judah, of Jacob. And she had married into that family.
Yeah, but it wasn't real.
But
Back in their father's
get a
house.
chance to finish the job. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
how-
there's
how-
another advantage, perhaps.
Excuse me?
Naomi,
How-
did you want to say something? Go ahead.
Yeah, how old would she have been had she waited for,
Oh, for the last son, for Sheila.
yeah,
I thought about that too. He's going to marry an older woman, but she's clearly still of childbearing years. So
by the time he would have been,
even if they're
eligible to
waiting for
marry
him to
her.
grow up, maybe he was 9 and now 10 years later he's 19, could be. And maybe she was 19 and 10 years
Close to
later
40.
she's 29. I'm just imagining
Okay.
it being really feasible still.
okay.
What was there no way that one could absolve a child from the
Oh, from the marriage?
situation where he must marry and can't be saying you're 3 and she's 30, we
Right.
absolve you of
Of-
these.
Right. So I think I'd have to do a little more research into this question of the chalitza ceremony, which has always been in place since the Torah. Later on in the Torah, when Yibum is described, the levirate marriage is described, it says, and if they don't want to marry, they do this chalitza ceremony. There's always a way out. No one is going to force him or her. No one would force a marriage, but they are tied to one another implicitly until released from that connection. And that's meant to be to the woman's advantage and to the advantage of the memory of this dead brother. But no one would force that. And probably in a kind of scenario that you're describing, there's a child brother, they would just do the chalitza, or I guess they would wait until he's an adult and he can decide to marry her or not. And maybe it sounds like more the family is deciding that, right? His father is deciding. But his father's not deciding. He's just delaying and delaying and delaying. And when you should do the right thing. Gloria wants to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah. I see this as a cautionary tale. I mean, if we're going to tie it together, Les Misérables with the Torah, that actions have consequences, and that we shouldn't be cavalier. Because in the case of Jean Valjean, when he was at the head of the factory, dismissing this nobody, oh, big deal, like it's not a big deal, but it was a big deal. And the same thing with Judah. Oh, I'll have a little fun while I'm traveling. I see this beautiful woman. It has consequences. So it's just that we should not be so dismissive that, it's a one-off thing, because it can come back to bite you.
Right. And our actions affect the lives of others. Terry, go ahead.
I'm just curious what happened to Shayla, because
Mm.
he becomes they're his half siblings and they're his nephews, I guess.
The whole thing is strange.
Yeah.
We should look up the there's the progeny, is listed later on. We should look that up. The progeny of Shayla. I have this feeling like he does. I don't want to speak without looking it up. I'm going to look it up and come back to you with that answer. Okay, so I promised you all I Dreamed a Dream. For any Les Miserables fans out there, this is one of the best of the best. If you think of Les Mis, you think of this song and maybe On My Own. We haven't gotten there yet. So we're going to close with I Dreamed a Dream. This is sung by Fantine, and we're watching the 10th anniversary concert edition with it, which is Fantine is played by Ruthie Henshall, who at the time, so the 10th anniversary would have been in 1995, and right around that time, or a couple years before that, she was playing Fantine on Broadway, and so she was brought in to be Fantine for this concert. Interestingly, this song takes place in a different place in the movie. So in the film version, I'm sorry, I'll just say in the musical, in the original musical, it's when she's just been kicked out of the factory. She's still okay. She still has her hair. She hasn't cut her hair and sold herself yet. But they move it for the film, for the 2012 film, they moved it past all of that miserable experience. And she's just sitting ruined, broken on the ground and singing this song. It makes it even more heartbreaking and even harder to watch with all those, I've talked about this before, like those close-ups of these incredible actors. But we're gonna watch the original. Thank you, Michael's doing our research, so you could take a look at what he's put in the chat. But I'm not gonna go down that path now because I really wanna watch this beautiful song, Fantine, who is disappointed. She too has had dreams. We could have gone in a Joseph direction here, by the way, the dreamer, but his dreams came true and her dreams did not. And really this song isn't really about dreams. It's about her hopes that have been crushed and the person she might have been had she been born with different circumstances, had, this man not left her, on and on. So let's sit back and enjoy I Dreamed a Dream.
A time when men were kind, when their voices were soft and their words inviting. There was a time when love was blind and the world was a song and the song was exciting. There was a time, then it all went wrong. I dreamed a dream in time gone by, when hope was high and life worth living. I dreamed that love would never die. I dreamed that God would be forgiving. Then I was young and unafraid, voice is soft as thunder as they tear your home apart, as they turn your dream to shame. You slept a summer by my side. He filled my days with endless wonder. He took my childhood in his stride, but he was gone when autumn came. And still I dream he'll come to me, where we will live the years together. But there are dreams that cannot be, and there are storms we cannot weather. I had a dream my life would be so different from this hell I'm living, so different now from what it seemed. Now life has killed the dream I
I wanted to leave some applause there because she so deserves it. Wow. Beautiful. You know, she is a woman of great strength. And even though her time will be up, she has put all of her energy into making sure that her children continue. And maybe that's another connection to Tamar. I never thought of that before. We don't know much about her, but we know that she has children, and her children are strong, and her children succeed. As does Fantine with her child. So I'll leave you with that, with some hope for the future and a beautiful song. And thank you so much for joining once again.